Okay, so picture this. A man is about to do three things that should be impossible. Number one, he's going to call for George Washington to be removed as commander in chief in the middle of the Revolutionary War. And somehow, he survives the fallout. The second thing he's going to do, 17 years later, he's going to have a dream that's so specific, it's impossibly precise. And then he does something even more miraculous. He writes it down and mails it to John Adams. And Adams keeps that letter for the rest of his life. And then the third thing is that same disgraced man is going to use that dream that he just sent to Adams to stop a war between two other founding fathers who haven't spoken in over a decade. And what happens next will become one of the strangest coincidences in American history. This is the story of Benjamin Rush, Dr. Benjamin Rush. And if you've never heard his name before, well, there's a reason for that. Now let's set the stage and go back a little bit. It's 1777 and the Continental Army is at Valley Forge. And let's be honest about what they're working with. They don't have food, they don't have blankets. Most of them don't even have shoes. The men, they're freezing to death. Disease, well, it's spreading through the camp like it's on a mission of its own. And into this nightmare walks Benjamin Rush. He's one of the youngest members of the Continental Congress, and he also signed the Declaration of Independence. Obviously, he's brilliant. He's also extremely passionate, and he has just been appointed Surgeon General of the Continental Army. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Rush arrives at Valley Forge, and he's horrified. Not just by the conditions that I just talked about, those were bad for everyone, but by what he sees as a catastrophic leadership failure. In Rush's mind, all of this traces back to one man, George Washington. He does what any reasonable person would do in that time. He sits down and he writes some letters. He writes anonymous letters, and there's a particular letter that essentially says, George Washington needs to go. But here's the thing. Rush doesn't just write one letter. He writes to Patrick Henry. He writes to John Adams. He writes basically to anybody that's going to listen. And one of those letters, he makes a critical mistake. His voice comes through so clearly that when Washington eventually gets his hands on it, he recognizes the author as Rush immediately. Here's the kind of insane part. Washington doesn't just read the letter. He reads it, recognizes Rush's handwriting and style, and he takes that and he forwards it to Congress with what can only be described as understated rage and fury. His reputation is completely destroyed. So let's let that sink in for just a second. Here's a 32-year-old person. He signed the Declaration of Independence. He was Surgeon General, and now he's done. Most people assumed they'd never hear from Benjamin Rush again. But most people, well, they were wrong. Let's fast forward 17 years and jump to 1809. Rush has rebuilt his life. He's become one of the most recognized doctors in America. He's teaching at what was then the University of Pennsylvania. He's treating the poor during yellow fever epidemics when other doctors flee the city out of fear. He's written the first American textbook on mental illness. He's been named the father of American psychiatry. And he argued for the first time in that book in American medicine that mental illness is a disease and it wasn't demonic possession. Nobody's talking about Washington's letter anymore. He's been forgiven mostly. He and John Adams have struck up a correspondence, hundreds of letters over the years. And then in October of 1809, here's the crazy part, Benjamin Rush has a dream. Now, here's the thing that really nobody talks about. Rush doesn't just have this dream and move on with his day. He writes it down in grave detail and he mails it. He mails it to John Adams. Rush dreamed that he personally reconciled John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, the two men who in 1809 absolutely despised each other. Their friendship had just been ruined and annihilated by politics. They hadn't spoken in years at this point. And Rush, well, he mails this dream to Adams. And Adams responds like most people probably would if somebody sent them a letter about a dream. Cool dream, Ben. I don't believe in dreams. He files the letter away and moves on. But here's the thing. He would also keep that letter for the rest of his life. And approximately 3 years later, everything in that letter would start coming true. In 1812, Benjamin Rush, the same man who'd called for Washington's firing, the same man who'd been publicly humiliated, decided he wasn't done. He started writing to both Adams and Jefferson separately, gently nudging each other toward each other. It worked. On January 1st, 1812, John Adams picks up his plume and wrote to Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wrote back, and what followed was the most extraordinary correspondence in American history. 158 letters over the next 14 years. They had letters on philosophy, on politics, on aging and getting old, grief, the revolution, of course. Here's the kind of insane part. Rush, he didn't live to see the full reconciliation. He died on April 13 of 1813, just as this correspondence was truly taking flight. He was 67 years old, but the letters kept going after his death. Adams and Jefferson kept writing, and then, miraculously, on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson dies at Monticello. A few hours later, 500 miles away in Quincy, Massachusetts, John Adams died too. His last words were reportedly, "Thomas Jefferson survives," but he was wrong. Jefferson had died 5 hours earlier, and he didn't know. Benjamin Rush never became a household name like Washington or Jefferson or Adams. But let's be honest, he's the reason that those last two names are still spoken together. Well, that is the story of Benjamin Rush, the doctor who called for Washington's firing, the dreamer who predicted a reconciliation of amazing stature, and the man who stopped a war between two founding fathers with nothing but letters and patience. I'm James, and this is Archives and Anchovies, the podcast about whatever it is I want to talk about that week. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe for more untold stories. And as always, I want to wish you a great day, a pleasant evening, and a wonderful week ahead. Thank you.